Okay, we're going to pick up with part 2 of our overview of the presidency, and our focus in this segment will be on the growth in presidential power. So we've got to trace the evolution of the presidency from the early presidents to our modern presidency. And if we look back at the early presidents, the first guys that held the office from about 1789 to 1825, you were looking at very prominent political figures, men who were prominent in the independence movement. All but Adams were Virginians. These were the upper echelon of our political society at the time, and they were well respected. They used their powers in a modest manner. Appointments were generally given to men of great character, and they followed the rule of fitness, that were you fit for office in making appointments. So there wasn't a lot of partisan battles and bickering going on at that time. Washington really tried to warn against the dangers of parties, but we saw that parties eventually emerged and would come to dominate our political system. Now we get to 1829 to about 1837. This is the Jacksonian era, and Jackson is prominent for the use of the spoils system, this idea that to the victor go the spoils, and that because he was the president, he had this power over appointments and getting the people that supported him into office, regardless of fitness, but more so as a reward for action. Now, Jackson was the one who vetoed 12 acts of Congress. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it was more than all of his predecessors combined. He was also known for ignoring Supreme Court orders, so he was a guy that pretty much saw the potential power of the presidency and its role as the voice of the people, and he used that, and he exploited that. Now, when we get out of the Jacksonian era, and we're looking about 1830 to 1930, we're looking at an era that was about the reemergence of Congress. This is a time when, the era of the no-name presidents. It's hard to recall who was president and what exactly they did. With the exception of very, prominent figures in our history, people like Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, this era is not marked by a lot of prominent presidents. You saw Congress take a step forward in becoming the dominant part of our government. The president at this time was seen more as an obstacle to good government rather than a source of inspiration. We had brief flashes of presidential power, like with Lincoln and his efforts during the war effort, but Congress was the dominant branch. Now, that all started to change when we hit the 1930s. And this was when a crisis, the Great Depression, necessitated change in government. And with FDR's New Deal came an expansion of what government did, and that expanded the number of government programs, government agencies, and all those agencies and programs fall under the umbrella of the executive branch, which is headed by the president. So that really sparked a new role for the American president in our society. We looked to the government to do more, and we saw the president as the person in charge of everything. World War II and the Cold War, both foreign policy crises that greatly expanded the power of the president, especially as we get towards the end of World War II and the dawn of the Cold War. The introduction of nuclear weapons into our system, and with that power over nuclear weapons and the president sitting there as commander-in-chief, and the need to be more of a crisis manager and be able to quickly respond to crises, we had a president now become the focal point of American politics. Congress tried to reassert itself in the 70s in the wake of Watergate and during the Ford and Carter administrations, but Reagan came in, restoring the power and prestige of the presidency, and we've seen that carried forward by all of his presidents that followed him, from George H.W. Bush through Clinton, George W. Bush, and now with President Obama. So we stand here today with a very powerful presidency, much different than what the founders had originally intended when they saw Congress as the dominant branch, and it's an interesting dynamic that has emerged in American politics.